All right, it's time to run into 5-star engines here. Talk to Ed. He's building a very special Model T engine. We're going to find out what that's all about. And I'm sure I'm going to learn something, and the idea is share it with you all. So let's see what happens. Good morning, Ed.
Good morning. We have a little project going on here for a couple months and coming to a close a little bit. And it's a little bit on engineering and all kinds of things that's different than we've done before. And I like projects like this, challenge. One day after another day, and you don't know what's happening tomorrow.
That's fun. That makes it much more fun.
You really can't do a whole lot until you get past one stage, and that works okay. You got to go to stage 2, stage 3, maybe stage 12 somewhere along the line, and someday you might get the whole project done, which we hope.
That's always the goal.
That's the goal, yeah.
Very good.
This old guy over here, a friend of mine, has some Model Ts.
Okay.
And lives over by Northern someplace. He has 2 or 3 Model Ts here in town. And he has a couple in Wisconsin. He drives those. But anyways, he's a Model T guy, and I've helped him over the years and became good friends. And he had this little project. And I said, yeah, I would like to do that.
Okay. You showed me a big balanced custom crankshaft sometime back from a Model T, but that's probably not related to this project.
It probably is.
Oh, is it? Okay.
This is the crank in here.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I should show you the original crank, which is pretty skinny and just a few things. It's really, really primitive.
Right.
They were really primitive motors in those days, and so of course it didn't go very fast. Probably 15 miles an hour down the dirt road somewhere. Sure. But these guys always there's something to do, maybe make it a little faster, or a little more power to go up the hill.
Sure.
And the Model T sometimes were even, they wouldn't go up the hill forward, so reverse was a different gear ratio, and you could back up the hill.
Okay.
And then turn around and go on your way.
Right on.
Yeah.
I think I even remember some of them. They were gravity flow fuel.
Oh, yeah.
And so if the gas tank, if going backwards, the gas tank would be up higher.
Yes.
I think that was also a factor. Anyway, so what's this motor from? What's this?
This motor here happens to be his motor. It's a 1917 Model T.
Okay, 1917.
And we had to come onto a scat stroker crank for a Model A.
Okay.
Which is a bigger motor.
Sure.
So there's where the trouble began.
So you're trying to put a Model A crank in a Model T motor?
Yes. Because it's a stroke, it's a 4-inch stroke plus a 1/4 inch. Okay. So that would be things that we looked at. I think we can do this.
Okay.
Maybe. 22, this motor here, we end up with a nice crank in it here with the X-ray counterweights.
Oh, again, there they are. Right. I see that.
Yeah. So then what we had to do then to bore all the main bearings out of this, because they were poured bearings. They didn't have anything like a bearing we have today.
Yeah. They call those Babbitt bearings?
That would have been a Babbitt bearing, would be the lead mixture of stuff was poured in the block and in the rods, and then it was melded in there, and you can't take it out.
Right.
Then they would machine it to fit whatever they had.
Right.
A little bit crude then, but that's what they knew.
That's what they had.
That's what they had, yeah.
Sure.
So we changed it over to the main bearings and bigger.
Okay.
So once we drilled them out bigger, we drilled it out almost past the bolts.
Wow.
So we had to change the caps because we would have had to drill right through them.
I see.
There was a little skinny cap.
One thing leads to the next.
Yeah. So once we got the steel caps, we're available for Model A.
Okay.
And we had to machine them to get them in here.
Okay.
And one of the things that we do is different, I think, is that these caps were not centered anywhere on the block. They were centered on the bolts. These bolts only.
Okay.
So every time you took the bolts off and on, the cap was misaligned.
Oh, wow.
So somewhere in the middle of the night, I decided, I have an idea. I usually get all my good ideas in the middle of the night.
Okay. Yeah.
So we drill little holes in here.
Okay.
In each one of these, and drill them through in the block. And we put roll pins in here.
Okay.
So now this cap stays aligned with the roll pins.
Yeah, so it locates it exactly the right place.
We never had that before.
I see.
So now we could take them off and on those roll pins, and then tighten the bolts, and they'd be in the same place they were before when you line board it.
Yeah. Okay. Very good.
So now we had the line board so big and the bolts are so narrow, we actually had to take the bearing and cut grooves in it here, both sides, so it slides over the bolt, past that
that's
bolt,
wild.
back in here. These bearings are already in here.
Okay.
But we had to grind them to get them in here. Then these motors never had an oil pump.
Okay. There's a splash
System.
Okay.
And then inside the motor, the oil that ran down the cylinder walls have a hole in them.
Okay.
And they ran in down the cylinder wall right on the main bearings.
Okay.
And that's how the main bearings got oil.
Interesting. Okay.
So there's a hole back in here that rolls the oil as the main bearing. Just runs down in there.
Okay.
Whatever splash. All of them. So we could have had a chance to put a Volkswagen oil pump on it.
Okay.
But then that would have been running lines in here and pressurizing the system.
I see.
And that would take another week or so to run those things. But we decided that we're not going to race this motor.
Right.
It's just going to drive it. Probably top RPM
Right.
be somewhere around 2,000.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're not that. So anyways, we got this Model A things, Model A crankshaft in this Model T motor.
Right.
All bigger size.
Yep.
So we end up with a model. Come with this. We had some scat rods that came with that.
Okay.
Scat rods with the bearing in them. The scat rods were 7.5 inches long.
Okay.
And they almost stuck out of the top of the block.
Okay.
And the scat rod had a 1-inch wrist pin.
Okay.
And nobody made a piston for it.
Okay.
For a Model T motor,
Right.
with a 1-inch wrist pin, they did for a Model A motor.
Okay.
And now we got this Model A crank and a Model T, which the block is shorter.
Sure. Right.
Yeah. So now we're in trouble again. So with that, to get a 6-inch connecting rod, 6.5 inches instead of 7.5, with a smaller bearing, and we end up. This is a little bit of something I made. This is the port bearing, Model T,
Okay.
with the scooper that scoops in the oil pan and scoops up the oil.
Oh wow! I see that. Right.
And it goes through the bearing in the backside with some holes, and that's what lubricates it.
Okay.
So I didn't know how long this piston's going to be, but we come up and found out that a Chevrolet 265, 1955-56.
That's the first year of the small block Chevy, isn't it?
Yes. They pistons were the same size as the Model T.
No way.
So they're 60 over. So I have a friend up in Nevada that has a bunch of parts. I called him, and we got 4 brand new pistons from him.
Okay.
And so then, so we end up with the pistons then, some kind of measurement to see that this piston, how length of the rod we need with this Model A crank and the Model T block. So the piston would come out the top.
Okay.
So then I made this connecting rod, and I decided to put the Chevy pistons, which is a Chevy wrist pin.
Okay.
Smaller than the 1 inch. And then the Model T rod, so I cut it in 2.
I've never seen an adjustable rod like that.
Yes. So this slides back and forth, and I can adjust it. I put the piston in, put the rod on the crank.
Okay.
And slide up and down so I get the piston coming right up to the top.
Okay.
So you tighten it up, and that's our...
That's how you measured your rod length you needed?
Yes.
Okay.
So that, I made a tool here.
Okay, yeah.
That I machined a 1.5 inch pipe and a Chevrolet wrist pin.
Okay.
So this slides right on there.
Oh, wow. That's great.
So this is, somehow I can hold the rod, the piston. So that's what we did there. So then
just make sure these two are parallel.
Well, they are. Of course they are.
Of course they are.
And they're straight.
Nice. Very good.
So got rid of that long rod. We don't need that anymore.
Right.
Then I found some of our Chevrolet rods of our race cars over the years. Maybe I shouldn't say that, because sometimes our race cars with nice connecting rods, like scat rods.
Uh-huh.
We end up with, out of a V8, we end up with 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 after we raced in a while.
Yeah, right? Okay.
Not necessarily a whole set of 8.
Yeah.
So I got some of those, and I sawed them off.
Okay.
This is a Chevrolet rod
Okay.
for a 350 Chevy.
Okay, right.
That give me the wrist pin that I needed.
Okay, so that's how you you kind of harvesting pieces.
Yes, like a little transplant here. So I took the
Okay.
rods then,
Uh-huh.
and I floated the wrist pins,
Okay.
and the rods were floated in again already.
Okay.
So I took them over here, the 2 pieces, with this, and measured them and ground them so they all fit just perfectly, the right length.
Okay.
Took the rod over here, and we had them ground so they match.
Okay.
I
So
took them
did
over-
you use this as a fixture to
Yes,
build your
to
piston?
weld.
To welding make your own custom connecting rods?
Yes.
Wow.
So with that, I took them over here to my friend in Glendale Avenue, to Highway Choppers. They
Okay.
have a guy that welds over there, their motorcycles, restores old motorcycles, 1930s and stuff, and he's an excellent welder.
Ah,
So I wanted to make sure they were welded right, and he welded them up and done an excellent job.
nice.
So
That's fantastic.
So then with that, we had no way to keep the floating connecting rod and the floating rod piston, because they all floated.
Sure. Okay.
And the pistons, there was no locks in them in the end of this. Sometimes there's spiral locks and
Oh, okay.
keep
Right.
the piston running back and forth. So we had him weld a nut
Oh,
on the end
wow.
of the rod.
Sure he did.
I drilled a hole through the rod.
Okay.
Then I drilled a hole through the wrist pin.
Okay.
And I went and got a stainless steel bolt, Allen bolt, with a lock washer, and screwed it through the bolt nut, through the hole in the wrist pin, and it comes in the wrist pin. So everything floats now.
Okay. And it's not going to move
Yeah.
relative to the
Everything, the
wrist
pin
pin.
floats back and forth on the bolt flies back and forth on this, and
Okay.
floats back and forth on the piston.
excellent. Wow.
We got
Good
all
work.
done,
Yep.
all worked out fine,
Okay.
with the rings in it and stuff. So then we have 2 pistons in it, and they work out perfectly. It grinds up the crank and everything.
Okay. So wow.
So
That
yeah.
was what a process to make
Yeah.
a custom piston
Yeah.
and connecting rod set. I mean, you made a set.
Yeah. Then on the rod bearings that we got, this is standard Model A rod bearing
Okay.
to go on this crank, but it's a scat crank,
Yep.
which they have radiuses on the crank. A radius is the difference between the round curve back in here.
Yes,
They're
I
on a-
see that.
Yeah, it's 45-degree angle. So if it was sharp, you ground this crank sharp, a
Yep.
good chance to make it weak and it would crack.
Ah, okay.
So they make that radius.
Uh-huh.
So once we got a standard Model A rod bearing,
Uh-huh.
then it's not made for a radius crankshaft. So we had to grind a little bit of chamfer this edge off the
I
bearing
see.
on both sides here.
And that way it matches
So
up.
now it goes in there and spins around just fine.
Nice.
And so it has a little clearance on the back and forth
Yeah.
and stuff like that. Yeah.
Excellent.
So that was another thing we had to work on.
Another thing, right.
Yeah.
Tell me about these valves.
Yeah. Normally this is a Model T there.
Yep.
You can buy some different accessories here, but we end up with a stock Model T valve springs.
Okay.
And these valves are almost perfect. They're 351 Windsor. That would be a 1973 or 74 Ford Windsor
Okay.
exhaust valves.
That was
And they go in this Model T block, almost a perfect length.
interesting.
And all the valves are the same size.
Yep.
So so you put the valve in and you grind the valve or the stem here a little bit and get your 14 thousandths
Yeah,
clearance.
so you just fine tune it that way.
Yeah. So we got all the
Wow.
valves done, we got all the seats done, and we milled the deck on here. Things, and we honed the motor out with our hone. Straightened it up a little bit. I don't know.
Wow.
Anyway,
it looks like you've
got
just
new gear on it, new crankshaft, and
yeah, and this of
Just-
course it's gear driven, no chains, just a
no
gear driven
change.
thing.
So the rod bearings right now, I'm just waiting because these had this dipper on them. It
Right.
dips oil and comes in that hole, and then it has all these wrinkles in there.
Yeah, I see all those.
So
Yeah.
I have to put those grooves in this bearing.
Oh, right.
So it oils, instead of oiling just the one little spot,
Right.
it would oil the X.
So how are you going to do that?
With a grinder.
Oh, you just, okay.
A teeny emerald grinder wheel and just grind it and then
just
sandpaper
dip
them
them
all
through.
off. Yeah.
Okay.
Then I can assemble that thing and for final torque everything down.
Okay, so what are you going to do with this?
Well, crank is longer than we did before, so none of this oil pan stuff fits.
Oh, right.
So they make a 1-inch adapter here.
Okay.
That goes around the pan.
Okay.
And then this stuff all bolts into it, so it misses the crankshaft and lowers the pan down 1 inch.
I see.
With the whole motor, and so we hope that will fit it.
Okay.
When we get a little closer, we'll buy one of those, and they make it with the pan bolts and everything in it.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, someone's figured out that part of the problem apparently.
Yeah. So right now, I have to take these caps over here that does not have the dipper.
Right.
And I'm going to make a tin dipper.
Okay.
And I don't know how far down here, and put them on all these caps.
Okay, yeah, so you're going to add something and fit it onto this.
Yeah, I drilled a hole in here for the oil to go in that dipper.
Yep.
But I got to have the door, and then when this crank goes around, it dips the oil.
I see. So you've got to invent something.
Yeah, I got to do that maybe today.
Okay.
So, and we'll make it out of sheet metal.
Okay.
And get them to fit here just
yeah, because it doesn't have to be super strong.
No, not too strong.
Yeah. And will you just attach it with these?
No, we'll probably weld it on the cap.
Just weld it on, okay.
Just with a wire weld, just tack it. They don't do that, but dip
just
oil.
Throws oil, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Well, we get that on, then they give us our spacing for this. How far these come down here, and yeah, a little bit there. So
very good.
Very good.
Thank you, Ed.
Kind of a fun project.
Yeah, something very different.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Thank you. Hey, Ed, looks like you've got some work done on the dippers. That's the last
we made
thing.
some dippers, and the early cars didn't have an oil pump in them, and so they just dipped the oil out of the pan. Right. They had to keep the oil level up enough where the dippers would dip into it, and Chevrolet did that, 6 cylinders, way up until maybe 48 or 49. But this is the early Model T motor. So here's the dipper that we put on these scat rods, because this is a scat rod, high performance, that goes, the rod goes with the scat crank, which is a Model A crank that we put in here, and a Model T motor.
Okay, so scat is already an aftermarket high performance. And so that's already a high performance for an A. Yeah. And you're putting it in a T.
And we're putting it in a T. Yeah, that's what we end up with.
Okay.
So we had to make all this stuff. If we'd have a Model A rod, it probably would have had dippers on it. But the scat rod is a high performance racing competition that matches the crank.
Okay.
So we made these dippers here out of tin, and then we have where the oil, as it scoops up the oil in the oil pan, it comes out and scoop it into that hole.
I see.
Then we've ground this grooves in the bearing, so instead of oil in the hole, then this oil will go up in here and actually oil the total bearing all the way across.
Okay.
Instead of just coming and oiling a 1/4 inch of the bearing.
Okay.
So then we got this on the rods, and all of them are done, and so it's a little bit of wrapping this project up. So we put the rod on here, and Chris, I don't know if you want to talk about this.
Yeah.
Spilling the oil around. Yeah. Splashing around. Right. Everything is a big splash. So we got the oil pressure going in here somewhere, going in the crankshaft, and it's got to go out of here and go up in on the piston and lubricate the wrist pin and the cylinder walls on the piston and something. And it gets enough oil up in there, but the rings will take it down, excess oil.
Yeah, so as you're doing this, you're having to think about where would the oil splash to, or where would it go?
Absolutely.
Or where would it drip down to, I guess, even, to figure out what to do.
Yeah, on this one particular motor, it drips down the cylinder walls and goes in a hole and oils the main bearings.
Really?
That's the only way the main bearings can get oil, because we can't put a dipper on the main bearings because they don't move.
Right.
So we don't have enough oil up on the cylinder walls to run down the cylinder walls and go in that hole and oil the main bearings.
Okay.
So we have to have plenty of oil.
Right.
We don't want to run that dry.
And that's why you have a big dipper, not a little dipper.
Yeah, a big dipper. Yeah. And then it oils the wrist pin too.
Okay.
So that oils everything. We hope there's a lot of oil being splashed around.
I see.
So to get that oil out of there, then this connecting rod is so wide here, and we kept this tight with the rod. So it's real tight, and it holds the oil in there lengthwise. Then we took the connecting rod and we ground that on a belt sander and narrowed it.
Okay, yeah, we can see it's narrower.
So
There's room between
yes.
the edge of the crank.
So we want the oil to stay in this part here, but then get out of that one, leave this part, and go out of those two cracks on both sides and splash completely up on the cylinder walls and wrist pins and stuff.
Okay.
So
I see. So now I guess it won't move around because it stays located by the bolts, right?
that's right, yeah.
Okay.
It has a little side clearance because you have to have a little bit
Yeah.
somehow, yeah. So it has a little side clearance on
I
it.
see.
And it holds everything together. So
Well,
when we got done doing that, then the next little problem we had was that the turned it over and got disassembled.
Yeah.
And then the connecting rods hit the camshaft.
Really?
So that's problem number 15.
Yeah, at least. So let me just see where the camshaft is. So it's up there at the top, up there. I see it. Yeah. So you're saying when he rotated around.
This connecting rod here
Yeah.
hit the cam because we've put a Model A crank and a Model T and plus the stroke, 1/4 inch stroke.
Right.
So all that interfered. So then we had to grind the back of the rod off a little bit here.
Okay.
Now we do this on our Chevy V8 stroker, some of our race car motors.
Oh, do you?
That we start stroking the motor and the Chevrolet motors, and they hit too.
Okay.
So we're familiar with this.
You're used to this problem.
Yeah, we're used to that problem of grinding a little bit off the connecting rods on like a 383 or 434 small block Chevy.
Okay.
So on race cars. So it's not new to us. We tighten
Interesting.
them all up, and so we hope that everything clears and the oil pressure is plenty and
Yep.
get this project done. So
Excellent. Well, so then you're almost ready then to start buttoning this thing up,
yes, we are.
and it'll
think
be
this
really
is-
interesting. If we ever get a chance, are you going to do? If you do end up putting it on a bench to run it, it'd be fun.
Yeah, it'd be fun to run.
Yeah.
Some of that in there was I don't know what they do for ignition system.
Oh yeah. Right.
Because sometimes the Model T had magnets on the flywheel.
Okay.
The early ones, the little coils.
Yeah.
And it went by a hole of the bell housing, and that sparked it and made ignition.
Interesting.
They did.
Yeah.
So now sometimes they put Pinot distributor, which is a 4-cylinder Pinot distributor.
Okay.
And sometimes they might put a Volkswagen distributor on this.
Interesting.
Someplace gear drive it off the front of the cam.
I see.
Then that makes you spark, and you get that timed and time in fire order and make it run.
Okay. So there's some decisions still to be made, I guess.
Maybe it's down the road from wherever
Yeah.
we
We'll
are.
see what the owner.
Get ready to put this in a car sometime.
Yeah, that's right.
Since we lengthened the stroke here,
Yep.
then the oil pan goes on here, and we know this is going to hit the oil pan.
Okay. You already know that.
So you already know that. Supervisors told us to beware.
Yeah.
So they do make a girdle, about a 1-inch girdle,
Okay.
a piece that's drilled for the same size as the oil pan gasket.
Okay.
Metal. All the holes are drilled, and it's about 1 inch tall, so that lowers the pan down 1 inch.
Okay. So it's
from
like
the
a
rest of the motor.
spacer underneath
Spacer,
here.
yes, under here.
Okay.
It goes clear back on the transmission.
Okay.
So that spaces that down, and then we have to make sure these dippers here are dipped in the oil.
Yeah.
So we got to keep the oil level up to where these dip all the time.
Okay. Right. So if you space it too far down, it's not going
We're
to
in
catch enough
trouble.
oil.
Yeah, that's number 18.
Right.
So we hope not.
That's right.
But we understand that, and it's fairly easy problem to fix.
Yeah.
A lot easier than what we did now.
Right.
This is
Well, this is a great example on when you decide to start modifying, you don't know where you're going to end modifying, right?
yeah, that's correct.
That's
yeah.
good. Okay, well,
So we hope it all works out fine, and we enjoy everything. So
that's fantastic. All right, it'll be a good Model T.
yeah, good Model T.
Great, thanks, Ed.
Thank you. This hat is for Sanderson Ford and for Neil
Oh, yeah.
Schrock.
Oh, yeah.
Get well, Neil. Hey, shh, shh. Hey,
Roberto!
2 seconds.